Also, my name is Greg Schrantz. I'm an alumni from this school. So I've been through the same course as you guys, except probably not as good now. Is it better? Have we improved the course? I hope we have. Good. So you guys are more equipped than I was. I also was on one of the seasons of Face Off. If you recognize my face, that's where you recognize me from. My name and face is around the school somewhere. I don't know. Somewhere. All right. So just to give you guys a brief kind of background, I've been using this stuff for 5 or 6 years now. I'm bad with dates, so it's in that time frame. I learned everything I know from those guys, so listen to them. They will give you good advice. So I now work for a company called Reynolds Advanced Materials. A lot of the shops out in California, they order from our LA branch. So most of the stuff you see in movies nowadays are using the materials that we sell in some form or fashion. Star Wars BB-8 is our Simpact urethane rubber resin hybrid. The cars in Mad Max Fury Road were fiberglass using our epoxamite, which is a laminating resin versus using your standard polyester resin, which is what you guys use here. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. So today I'm going to be demonstrating some of the stuff that we sell that you guys don't get to try out while you're at school. So first thing we're actually going to start off with is a quick little thing on makeup. So for 4 semesters, I don't know how far you guys have gotten yet, but this is an encapsulated vinyl piece. This is using our cue balls vinyl versus, say, Baldies, which is typically what you're going to find on the market right now. So this just came out about, I would say, 6 months ago. So in the bags, if you were lucky enough to get one, sorry, I did not expect this many people to be showing up today. This won't be in there. You can find it on our website, though. So this is just basically like Baldies. I find it's easier to use. You can thin it 2 to 3 times parts with just plain old acetone. It's an acetone-based one, so that means it dissolves with acetone. Another thing that we just came out with is our adhesive, Dermatac. This is going to be an offset to Telesis for 4 semesters that have used that. For your first semesters, if you haven't used that, second and third, it's a contact adhesive used for encapsulating vinyl pieces. Also, you can use this with foam latex as well. It's another alternative to Prazade also. The nice thing about this is it comes with a very nice remover that takes it off. And by taking it off, I mean it takes it completely off. I'm going to quick apply this piece to myself. I'm going to be wearing throughout this entire process just to show you that it will hold up for a long day. So, and you don't need a lot of it either. So, dropper bottle, sponge. Just add a little bit onto here. So, since this contact, you apply it to the skin and then to the piece as well. Once it's both dried, you then press the two together, and that's what causes the adhesion. So I'm going to take my piece and apply some to my piece. Again, you don't need a lot, just a thin layer is plenty. You do need to be careful because of it being contact. If you get the piece folded, it will stick to itself. So it's not like Prazade where it's gonna, as long as it's still wet, will pull apart. This will not. Once it comes in contact, it wants to stay tacked. So then, I'm just gonna take this, apply it to the back, pressing it down, working from the inside out to work that off. And then in this cup, I have a little bit of acetone here. Actually, I'll add a little bit right underneath here because that's still coming up. Let it breathe for a second. Q-tip. I'm just going to go around my edges to dissolve them. So this is really nice if you have someone shooting in high definition, so you don't have to worry about those pesky edges. Main thing is also, because this does dissolve with the acetone, you only want to get your acetone on those edges. You don't want to be getting it on the rest of the piece, otherwise you will dissolve that out as well. And this piece right here, this is just to help control the piece because of how thin the vinyl is, just to give myself a little bit more control. All right, that's gone. Let's do some pressing. Take a little bit more acetone just to get rid of those edges. Just going to take a little bit of alcohol makeup. So alcohol will not affect the cue ball, so you can use alcohol makeup on it, which is nice. Basically, it's like your grease makeup that you guys have, except more translucent, works better on silicone pieces and encapsulated pieces. A little bit of spray. And then just splatter like you would standard. And the way this one was made was by airbrushing the cue balls, not brushing it into a mold. So it was, again, just thinned out by one part of the cue balls, and then 3 parts of acetone just ran through an airbrush. So that's just a quick thing. I could put blood and accent this a little bit more, but for time's sake, we're not going to do that. But again, just blends right in. Really nice, really easy to use. Also, I find the cue ball, if you are airbrushing, cleans out of your airbrush much nicer than using baldies. I've used both, and I'm not saying this just because I work for the company. I do prefer using this over the baldies. So this is the remover. You get a lot of it. So at the end of this, I'll be taking this off, but just to show that this will last, I'm going to wear it this entire time. Also, this is the silicone mold that I used to make this piece. So you would still sculpt your piece, put in your cutting edge, and then you would use a silicone, or you could use a rigid. Silicone just works a little bit nicer because it helps releasing the cue balls because it will stick. If you're going to be using a rigid, you do need to use some kind of release agent. We still recommend using our Ease Release 200 along with this, more for the fact that you're going to be applying a gelled silicone, so you don't want the silicone to stick to itself. So that's more what the release agent's for. It's also going to help release that cue ball as well, which again is that vinyl. So I'll pass this around so you guys can see that. So this is just a quick piece sculpted out of insulation foam. If 4th semesters, you guys will be using this in your props class if you haven't already started to. It's a great way to make props. Lightweight, good for sculpting. Problem is, it's easily damaged. You need to reinforce this somehow. So you can coat it with wood glue and do tons and tons of coats of wood glue, which is temperature and humidity dependent, so they can take a while to dry. Or you can go the other way and go with one of our coating systems called Epsilon Pro. There's also Epsilon, the difference being Epsilon is a rigid material, where this is a semi-rigid material. Also, this has an easier mix ratio of 2:1. So instead of having to weigh it, I can just eyeball this by just taking 2 containers, going half-half, and mixing the 2 together. One other thing to note about insulation foam is it's sensitive to solvents. So you can't throw spray paint on top of it. Polyester resin will eat away at it. Bondo will eat away at it. So you have to seal it first in some form or fashion if you're going to reinforce it, especially if you want to reinforce a thin piece with fiberglass. So this will act as your reinforcement and your sealer. Oops. Let's use these. So part A is 2 parts to the 1 part of B, pre-mixing the material. Always want to pre-mix your material. Reason being is you can think of any of these materials like salad dressing. If you let them sit too long, they separate. And then if it's separated, it's not going to cure properly. This is chemistry. Everything is balanced. So giving everything a good premix is always important. So for this, we're just going to again measure out by volume. And then for the part B, 1 part, so less. Also, if you can see inside of here, I don't know how well you guys can, it's only about half full. The reason being is you only need half of the part B. There's nothing wrong with it. Any material that's in an off ratio like this, you're always going to see 1 big container, 1 smaller container. There is nothing wrong with it. You're not being gypped or anything. It's just how it is. So this one. This is a little bit thicker, so we're just going to do this. There we go. All right, there's my 2 to 1. So for this, we're going to pigment it as well, so we can see the coverage, as well as I could use this as a base color as well. So I can just paint on top of it, and then I have a base color underneath. So in case that paint were to get chipped or scratched off, I have something underneath there that's not just going to be green foam. So for this, we're going to be using one of our colorants, So Strong. This is the black So Strong, or tints, so they're going to stay transparent. We have other ones called UVO, which are UV resistance and are more opaque. So that's going to be the difference between those two. I'm going to mix it into the part A first. Again, 3 drops, and it's very black. That's the reason we call it So Strong. Also, if you guys have questions throughout this, you can ask them. Just raise your hand. That's all I ask. So reason I am only putting it in 1 part first is because the chemical reaction goes off once the 2 parts are mixed. So to make sure I have the optimal amount of working time, I keep the 2 parts separated and only pigment 1 first, because I don't want to be trying to work in that pigment while I'm mixing my material, because it's just eating up that pot life. This, I have plenty of time because this is a slower setting material. But if I was using something faster, I wouldn't want to be trying to mix in pigment and then as well mix my 2 materials together. If you do that, you can end up with pigment that's unmixed, and then it will leach out of your pieces. So you don't want that, or you'll get streaks. So ideally, you do want to avoid that. One other thing to keep in mind, because this is a coating, you want to make any of your details a little bit deeper, because you are going to be adding layers on top of it. So it's going to fill them in a little bit. So now that I have my 2 parts mixed, I'm going to do what's called a double mix and pour. It's what we recommend doing. It's just to ensure a thorough mix so you don't have any unmixed material, because if that does end up on your piece, it won't cure. It's going to stay a tacky, goopy mess. So as far as the coating goes, we do have other ones that are gonna act a little different. We have what's called the casting coat. It's designed to be another rigid coating for foams, except it has a fire rating. So say you're working for an amusement park and making something for them, they have particular codes that they do need to meet because of safety. So you would need to have a material that meets those requirements. Casting coat would be one of them. So with this, I'm just going to be brushing it on. Actually, let me just quick pass a piece around so you guys can feel what this stuff feels like cured. Because this can also go over EVA foam or floor mat foam or craft foam. So also other great ways of making quick one-offs for props versus having to go the route of sculpting something, making a mold, and then casting it. So I'm going to set that there really quick. So this here is the Epsilon Pro on the EVA foam I was talking about, and it's been pigmented and added with a colorant and our cast magic powders. The one going around, that's the sun, that's the casting coat that I was talking about. Both are going to be doing similar stuff. The casting coat's more rigid. One interesting thing about the casting coat is it can be used for coating, or you can pour it solid. So you can do solid pieces versus having to just do coating. Or you can also thicken it and then use that to just make pieces as well just by using the thickened. So with this, you're going to want to do multiple coats. So the armor piece, that's with the Epsilon Pro, that has 3 coats on it. The casting coat piece has 2 coats on it. So you want to be doing at least a minimum of 2 coats. If you just do one, it's going to be too thin and not provide any real protection. So you want to be adding something on there. All right, so now we have this coated. We're going to leave the back side down. I'll leave this with you guys then, and once it's fully cured, they can feel the difference between the two.
How long does that take to cure?
Full cure 16 hours. Tack-free is 6 hours. So we're going to leave it kind of just sitting here for right now. This is also, in a higher mass, it goes off faster. All these materials, for the most part, are mass sensitive. So the greater the mass, the faster it's going to go off. So in the case of this, what's in that cup right there, that's going to cure much faster than the thin layer that's on here. Thank you. So we're going to set this off to the side to let that set up a bit before we add a second coat to it. And then along with type of coating foams, you can also use what's called freeform habitat. It's an epoxy putty. It works very well for doing aquarium pieces if you get hired for a job like that, or zoo pieces, or just props. I wouldn't use it for so much for props. If you're looking to do props, I would recommend using a material called freeform air. It's another epoxy dough. That's this one right here. Great for support shells as well. So it's a nice sturdy material, yet still lightweight. So with any of the Habitat folding powders, they come with folding powder. These are very sticky materials. You can think of them like taffy. So if you don't have anything to act as a barrier to prevent the tack from going off, you're gonna have a much harder time to controlling that. So for that, I just have a mixing container here that the powder will go into. Also, with any of our materials, you'll see this. It's a technical bulletin. This will tell you pot life, cure times, how the material can be used, what kind of properties the material has, as well as the SDS or safety data sheet. Those are always important to have. It'll tell you what to do if, say, you were to get it in your eye, which you shouldn't be doing, but in case you do, it's going to tell you the proper way to go about treating that. It does happen. People work fast. All right. All right, I'm also going to leave a little bit of water right here. The water is going to help with smoothing out this as well. So I'm just going to take some of the powder, put it into the bottom of the container, grab a popsicle stick, and like I said, this stuff's pretty much taffy. Nice large mass. This is also a 1-to-1 by volume, so you pretty much eyeball it. So you get two portions that are about the same size. There's my one. This is a little bit more dough-like, but it's still very nice, thick and sticky. A little bit more. So once I have the two together, what I'll do is just put a little bit more powder in here just so I can mix it. You can just mix it by hand. I recommend throwing it on your gloves first before going for the mix, and then just working it together. And you're just going to keep mixing it until you have a consistent color. This is the fire safe. So again, it has that fire rating to it. There's also the black, which is, as the name entails, it's this type of consistency, except it's going to be all black, doesn't have the same fire rating for it. And then there's the flex, which is going to be softer and has some flexibility to it. So if you need a piece that isn't as hard, you would use that. Plus, it's going to give it a little bit of give to it, so that way you don't have just a solid piece there. And then again, you have the freeform air, which works great for support shells. It's my preferred support shell material for most things because, again, it's like a dough, so I just have to roll it out to a 1/2 inch thickness, and I can just lay it up on a piece and walk away from it. I don't have to watch it. I don't have to mess around with it much. It's literally just mix, roll out, apply, and you're done. Yes?
What was the powder for?
The powder is, because of how sticky it is, it just helps with keeping it from sticking to my gloves. Think of it like if you're mixing dough, you put flour down on a board, same principle applies.
What are you using for the powder, and also what's the cure time when this is mixed?
So you have an 1.5 hours of working time with this stuff. Again, mass dependent. If you have it in much larger mass, it's going to go off faster. The reason being is these materials exotherm. So higher temperature causes reactions to go off faster. So higher volume, higher temperatures, faster cure. Cure time, 24 hours for full cure, but you have an 1.5 hours worth of working time. As long as you don't go over 2 inches after that point, that's where you're going to start seeing probably it shorten. Again, temperature is going to be dependent. How warm is your material when you are working with it? If the material is on the colder side, well, then the reaction slowed, so you can get more working time out of it. I don't recommend forcefully cooling your material. It's always best to work at it at room temperature. That's what they're designed for. Room temperature would be 73 degrees Fahrenheit. So if they're too cold, you'll prevent them from curing altogether. If it's too hot, well, they're going to go off much faster and you're going to have less working time. So it's best to work at room temperature so you have the optimal amount of working time as well as the material curing properly. So I'm just going to apply this to just a cardboard tube, just for purposes. You can use this as a sculpting medium. I've seen people do some crazy stuff with this already. I've seen sculptures done. Theme parks love this, actually. They will do facades with this. They love the flex because they'll do handrails out of it. So if you've ever been to a park where they have like the bamboo handrails, it's typically like an aluminum that's covered in flex. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But if it has some give to it, that's probably what it is. Disney actually loves our stuff, and so does Universal. So if you've been to either park and you look around, it's probably our stuff that you're seeing. So this here is a texture stamp. It's our Rebound 25. It's a brushable rubber. You guys, I don't think, purchased this yet. So this self-thickens, so as you're working with it, it gets thicker, and it's a thicker viscosity, so it's designed to be brushed on. So this is just a tree bark texture. So just with a little bit of water, I can just press this in, and then I have my nice wood texture. Same thing works with this rock texture. Same thing with the texture pad. I can just go over, apply it, and you can just keep going over and over and over. You don't have to just, one will become repetitive, so you can do multiple and just stack them on top of each other and they'll blend. We actually have a full-size tree made out of the free-form air in our showroom that's just sitting out there, that's been textured and done the same way, where it's just a chicken mesh all around it for the armature, followed by some of the epoxamite that I was mentioning earlier, sorry. Soaked it with burlap just to add some rigidity to it, and then the freeform air was applied and then stamped. So we just have a full-size tree. Another thing you can do with it is press it into a mold. So this is, again, that fire safe, and it's just pressed into a mold that I'll be doing next. So it's still going to retain all that texture. So it's very easy to go out, take a copy of a rock instead of sculpting a rock. So it saves you time. So any of this stuff you can always factor in, what is my time versus how much time versus material cost, rather. So am I going to spend the money on material? Because if that's the case, well, how much time is it going to take me to do something cheaper? Because your time may be more valuable than your material. So it's always things you can take into account when working with it. Ronzio and Jesse will talk about the wonderful triangle later on with you guys of quality, time, and money. You only get two. You don't get all three. So with that, this is the mold that that piece came out of. This is a silicone putty called Equinox. Again, you mix it like a dough, and you press it onto a piece. So this was just taken off of a rock, just plaster bandages for the support shell. Just because of the shape, I wanted to give it a little bit more strength to it. But depending on what you can do, you can just use the mold by itself. Works really great for taking quick molds. This particular one is our Equinox 38. So it's a 5-minute pot life, half-hour cure time. So half hours, you peel the piece off and it's done. So if you gotta do something really quick outside that you wanna grab a mold of, it's a great way to do it. So what's brushed in here right now is our Uracoat. It's a urethane coating for foams. So you can brush this over top something like upholstery foam, or you could brush it into a mold like this to capture the detail. So give you guys an idea of what that feels like. That was molded in a Rebound 25 mold, and then the Uracoat was brushed into it and then backfilled with foam. So it's a great way to keep that detail there. And then for you guys on this side. So for this, as I was mentioning before with weighing material, this is going to be one of the ones that you weigh. So getting out a gram scale, zeroing it out. This is a mix ratio of 100 parts to 10 or 10 to 1 by weight of A to B. Again, because it's so little, just a little container here. So for this, I'm going to weigh out 40 grams of part A. Going to use some pigment just to do some coloration to it. 2 drops of the So Strong brown. Four drops of the flesh. And just a dab, I'm going to use a full drop of the black. So I'm just going to mix this together. So the reason I brushed the first coat in before this started was just to make sure I had one coating in there. We don't have time to do 2 during the presentation. So the reason being, again, like the Epsilon Pro, you want 2 coatings. Also, if you notice there's purple showing through that color, it's going to separate a little bit on that silicone. So by doing a second layer, you're going to create a thicker skin and fill in any of those open spots. So that's just the reason for that. So then I'm going to put that back on our scale, tear it out, do my 4 grams of the Eurocoat, part B. There we go. And again, mixing this together. So like I said before, this can be brushed on top of foam or precast foam pieces to add durability. This can be thickened to make vines, as a variety of uses. The major thing that is kind of the downside to the Eurocoat, because for the most part, it will withstand impacts and any type of abuse you can kind of throw at it. It's a little bit harder to paint, so that's the big downside to it. So with that, you can either paint it with more Eurocoat or another urethane-based paint. Those tend to be a little bit expensive. We find that tulip fabric paint, as weird as it sounds, sticks to it quite well. So that's an option for that also. So again, still doing that double mix and pour. Once I have that nicely thoroughly mixed, switching over to, again, just a chip brush for the application. Just going to dispense all this. And then just brushing in this in just to get a nice thorough coverage. So with this, then we're going to back it with a foam. So the one that's being passed around, that'll be the same foam we're backing with it. That is our flexible foam. You guys will be using some of those here. You guys, I don't know what weight you guys are using, but we sell the different weighted foams. So that's the flex foam at 6, so it's a 6-pound foam. So basically means if you took a 1 foot by 1 foot cube of that foam, it would weigh 6 pounds. So any of our foams, whatever that number is how much per pound, per cubic foot it's going to weigh. So if you need a piece to be light, well then you can backfill like this with, say, the Flex Foamit 3 or the Foamit 3 just to create a nice lightweight piece. But if you wanted to do something with that it's just foam and paint on top of that foam, you could use one of the denser foams that are going to be like the Flex Foamit 25 or 17 that, what?
You said 25, 17?
Yes. Sorry, Ronzi, open my head. Okay. Sorry, Ronzo, you know I'm bad with movie references. All right, so we're going to, again, just leave this off to the side. So, as I was saying, those, because they're denser, they can what's called self-skinning. So when you pour them and you apply back pressure to them, what will occur is you will get a skin. So it's a nicer surface on your foam versus just being very open cell and looking like foam. So when you go and paint on top of it, it's not just going to look like foam. Again, the problem with that, though, is they're going to be heavier pieces because it's the denser foams that are going to do that. Also, you're going to need back pressure to go along with that. So as you're pouring it, you want some kind of backing plate that you're going to be putting on your mold itself when you pour it to be able to get that back pressure. Without it, you're not going to be seeing the same results. So again, this will be applying the second coat. Other coating systems that we do have, since you guys do ZBrush, if you guys ever get into shops or anywhere that will use a 3D printer, one of the major problems with 3D printers right now that is slowly getting better, but it's still a problem, is the striations that occur with them. So those either need to be sanded off or acetone baths, which are very noxious, and you don't want to be breathing in that. So you don't see as many people doing that, and also it's limited to the type of plastic that you are using. So an alternative to that is we have a coating called XTC that you would use similar to this, where it's, again, that 2-to-1 mixed ratio there. And then you would brush it on to your piece. Which is this guy here. So half of it is coated, the other half isn't, so you can feel the difference there. If I remember correctly, that's just 2 coats of the XTC with very minimal sanding done to it. So we'll save you time with that if you guys end up doing 3D prints in the future. It's a great way to kind of get around the labor-intensive work of bondoing and sanding those down. Another thing that you guys were probably going to be coming across, especially once you guys hit page to screen, is going to be your fiberglassing. With fiberglass, you guys are still using polyester resin, correct? Yep. So the main thing you're probably going to find out in a shop is going to be polyester resin, which is commonly just referred to as fiberglass resin. So if someone would hear someone talk about a fiberglass mold, they're typically talking about a mold made of polyester resin. A little bit more. Scoop that out. So the main thing with polyester resin is you use MEKB. It's nasty, so most people don't like using it. Epoxies aren't as bad, but you still need to be careful with them. Proper ventilation, overexposure can lead to health issues, just like regular polyester resin. So things just to always keep in mind. So with working with any of these materials, proper ventilation with them. Don't want to be working in a tiny room. So yes, I know it's tempting to work in your bedrooms. I've done it. But make sure you have proper ventilation, especially when you're working with any of the plastics or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're not just breathing in all those fumes all the time. They lead to health problems into the future. So again, that's what those SDSs are for. So with this, again, just pre-mixing my pigment into one part before I mix the two together. So when you're doing composite pieces, which is what a fiberglass mold is going to be, or a piece that's made entirely out of fiberglass, what it entails basically is using a laminating resin, which is in our case what we sell is our epoxamite, forcing that through the fibers of the fiberglass or carbon fiber, if you want to go that extent, which you guys probably wouldn't be, but depending on what shop you end up being, they will sometimes use that for stuff. Large puppets will use carbon fiber pieces to keep everything as lightweight as possible, so it could be something that you do come across. So those are specifically designed to be used with those. So you can create a very lightweight, strong piece. So for anyone that has done life casting so far, you guys have picked up your nice Ultra Cal 30 head molds. You guys know how heavy those are? Just wait till you guys get to your mass project and count around 50-pound plus molds. So the alternative is going to be composite. So that is a composite one using the Epoxycoat Gray and freeform air, like I was talking about before, and then fiberglass with the epoxamite. It creates a very strong, lightweight life cast. It will save your back later on down the road, but of course is more expensive than UltraCal. Nothing's going to beat the price of gypsums. They're just so cheap. So again, goes back into what's your budget like, what do you have? So they're very nice and light. So you can do life casts, make molds, all in that same method of applying that epoxy coat, which is your gel coat or your surface coat, which is going to capture all your detail, followed by a backing layer, which you can do just straight fiberglass, or you can use the freeform air to add some girth to the piece. So gives it a little bit something to grab onto. If you're doing a life cast, I recommend using the freeform air just to add a little beef to it. Also, it gives it something for the rod or tubing in the back to kind of fall into. So just things to keep in mind. So again, just applying a second layer to this. Another benefit of adding colorants when you're adding layers like this is to see how thick your layers are, to know where you've covered, where you haven't covered, just to give you a good idea. And then with any of these other than the Uracoat for coating materials, you can sand them. So even if you have small things that may be a problem that you need to fix up, you can always sand it later on after it is cured. And then as far as painting, they're very easy to paint. I've never had any issues with trying to paint over top of the Epsilon or Epsilon Pro or XDC. All of them are perfectly fine to paint with spray paint, acrylic paints, anything like that. All right. So this will now get set back off to the side. All right. So the main resin you guys use, as far as, unless I'm misstating things, is the Smoothcast 300. I don't think you guys have any of the other resins here, do you? No. So Smoothcast 300 is 1-to-1 mix ratio by volume, and it has what's called a snap cure. So the resin will go from liquid to a solid, a snap, that's the name. You get that white color change. If you guys want to do hollow pieces, it's not ideal for it because of that. It's from very liquid to being quick solid. So a way around that is to use a resin that has a gradual cure to it. In our case, it's going to be the Smoothcast 57D or 65D. Both of these are gradual cure resins, so it just means they get slowly thicker as the pot life goes on. Both of them are going to have a 2.5-minute pot life, so if you're rotocasting by hand, and what rotocasting is just taking a mold, rotating around so you have a hollow piece or a more even just coating so it's not a solid piece. So it'll bring down the cost of pieces, or just for the fact that you're doing like a mask, so you don't need it to be solid. So that's the 65D, and that has 5 coats of the 65D on that. This is a composite piece using the epoxy red with 3 layers of fiberglass with the epoxamite on it. So both weigh approximately half a pound. That's going to be much stronger than that piece is. So composite pieces are going to be stronger. Also, as far as support shells, again, you can use fiberglass as a support shell. Really nice, lightweight. I like them if I'm going to be doing rotocasting because I don't want to be lugging around and trying to turn a 20-pound mold. It's not fun. So for this, Part A, Part B, measure out 1-to-1 mix ratio by volume. Bit more. Using So Strong Red. One other thing with the Smoothcast 57D is it's a semi-rigid. So that 300Q, or rather the 300, is a rigid material. So it gets hit, if it's in a thin enough section, it's just going to shatter. It doesn't have give to it. This will have give to it. So there's a little bit of flexibility in there. So if you need a piece that's going to be able to take impacts, stage props, different stuff like that, this is where this is going to come in handy. So if you're doing stunt props, using a semi-rigid material is a good choice for that. So one other thing is this is not going to change color. This is going to stay this red color. There's going to be no color change to it whatsoever. So the nice thing about that is you don't have to worry about getting a pink color if you add red to that Smoothcast 300Q, or 300 rather. You're going to get a pink color. You're not going to get a true red. So that's where this comes in handy. And then for this, we're just going to pour the resin into here and just rotate around just to coat the edge of it, just to give it a nice coating. Once I have everything coated, just going to keep rotating it to get a nice even consistency all the way around. So with, again, benefits of rotocasting, you're just going to be lighter weight pieces or hollow pieces. You can always backfill them with foam if you don't want them to be hollow, just to add extra strength to them. So those are always options you guys can go along with. Other options with resins besides the 300 are going to be Smoothcast 325, which is a color match one, is what we consider it to be. It's a translucent, so again, you can pigment, get accurate colors with it, and be able to match a certain color if you need that to be the case. There's also Smoothcast 320, which is an off-white, which is actually cheaper than the Smoothcast 300. So if you are on a budget and you're going to be painting a piece anyway, that's a great way to relieve that. In each line that I just mentioned, there are slower setting versions of them, so you don't have to work in that 2.5, 3 minute pot life curing in 10 minutes. If you have a much larger piece, you can go with something like the 305 or 310, where then with the 305 you have a 7 to 9 minute pot life. With the 310 you have a 10 to 20 minute pot life, again mass dependent. So if you have a larger piece that you need to pour, those are going to be beneficial to you that way. All right. Thoroughly coated. Just rotate this till it thickens up enough. Keep doing that. On top of those, we also do have another line of resins called Task. Task have different properties to them. They're going to be stronger than the 300, the 320, and 325. So if you need something that's going to be a little bit more impact resistant, you could go with something like Task 13 or 14. They're a kind of hybrid material. They are considered a resin, but they act more like a rubber. So they're very soft in that aspect. Again, as I mentioned before with Simpact, Simpact is another one of those hybrid materials where you have a nice, strong piece that's durable. A lot of the prop shows down in Disney World and Universal, those are the types of resins that they're using for the props that you see them use. So we're going to set this here. Add a second coat to this. Other options for casting include different effects with them. This piece is using the Smoothcast Onyx, which is a all black resin that has a very high heat resistance and is hard. So cold casting is taking real metal powders and adding it into your resin to create a metallic look. It's a benefit if you need a piece that looks like metal without actually having to go to the extent of getting a piece bronzed or cast in aluminum or brass. Metals are not cheap, so it's a great way to cut down on cost in that aspect. Another nice thing about doing cold casting is you can patina them, so you can add different patinas to get different effects to them. So if you need to get a piece that has aged drastically, you can just get a patina and apply it right over top. Then you don't have to worry about that. So it's another benefit of that. So applying second layer. And as I said before, with them being heat sensitive, as the first layer cures, it's going to help accelerate the curing process of the second layer. So that's going to be a benefit. So you're going to have to do less and less time rotating the mold around as you add additional layers, as long as you don't wait too long. The main thing about applying layers of urethane on top of each other is you don't want the urethane to fully cure in between layers. If you do, you're gonna have issues with it sticking and it can delaminate or separate, so that can become problems. So you wanna be doing layer after layer after layer with these. You don't want them to be going, all right, here's a layer and then I'm gonna wait 2 hours to do that. It's gonna be too long. You're gonna have problems with it adhering. Also, as far as build up, it builds up best when the first layer has gelled. It's going to sit on it better and create a thicker build up there. Nice even coating. We're just gonna rotate this around a bit. So if you have thin casting sections, you can use what's called Task 4. It's one designed for that. If you want to have really high heat deflection, say you're doing a shoot out in Arizona, well, Arizona desert heat, plastics, especially if you have to do plastic props or anything like that, they're all temperature sensitive. They have what's called a heat deflection point, or how hot are they going to get before they're going to start warping. You get them warm enough, they're going to start drooping and problems. So you can, again, use that Smoothcast Onyx that was being passed around, because that has a high heat deflection, or you can use the Task 8. Both of those will be able to take that heat and not warp, especially if you have to do thinner pieces with them. So again, you guys can see it's starting to thicken up now. So again, just that gradual cure profile will help with just keeping a more even. So you have a little bit more control over it. There's also rotocasting machines that are available, but those are definitely a little bit more expensive. So if you don't have that option, this is definitely the way to go with that. Task 15, again, is just a higher performing resin that's, again, designed to be rotocasted, so it has that gradual cure profile to it. All right. Set that there. And I know I'm throwing out a lot of names and numbers and stuff, so in the catalogs that are in your bags, this has all of the different materials that go through, epoxies, different types of effects there. The foams tells you what kind of properties the foams have, what expansion rates they have, support shell materials, clear materials. Again, here's all that task I was talking about. And then in the very back of your catalogs, there's a table of content for all of your materials. It's an index, basically. So you can go down, see what your properties are, what's the cure type, cure time, pot life, how hard are they, colors, all the information you would need to know about a material are going to be back there. Also, you guys can call the store. We can help answer any questions you guys have. There's a lot of materials. It can get very confusing from time to time just because of the amount that is available. So just give us a call. We can help answer anything. So another option for, again, even though this is designed to be rotocasted, you can pour it as well. Expensive. Pigmented. So, how many of you guys have done silicone molds so far? Most semesters? Okay. So with silicones, I don't know how much Dave talked about the difference between different types of silicones. You have platinum silicones and you have tin silicones. Your platinum silicones are going to be more expensive, but those will be the ones that are skin safe once they're cured, or in the case of ones like the Body Double and the EcoFlex Double Out 35, those are skin safe even in a liquid format. So instead of using alginate, you can use the Body Double to do a casting, so that way you don't have a one-time use mold, you can do multiple castings out of that one mold. So platinums are going to be more stable because they're an additive cure, so it's two components coming together to cause the catalyzation. With tin-cured silicones, which is what the Mold Max 30 that you guys use is, those take in moisture from the air, which is part of the curing process. So those have a greater shrinkage to them. They're not going to be skin safe because, again, they're going to be leaching things out over time. So you don't want to be putting those on someone. And then they will last, if you're just having a mold sit on a shelf, about 5 to 7 years, depending on how you take care of those molds. So that's just something to keep in mind. Where platinum silicone is going to last 35 plus years as long as you take care of it. So price difference, tins are going to be cheaper, of course, but platinums are going to last longer sitting around. But as far as castings go, you're going to have about the same amount of castings out of both. So if you're just going to be casting and casting and casting and going until that mold burns out, a tin silicone would probably be a better choice for that to cut down cost. So what we have here is a MoldStar 16 mold. MoldStar is our platinum series that has a lower viscosity, so you don't need to vacuum degas your silicone. So thicker silicones, because of that thick viscosity, are going to run into issues of air entrapment. When you're mixing it in, you're going to introduce more and more air. So vacuum degassing will pull that air out. So MoldStar is designed to be able to be poured without vacuum degassing. So if you don't have the equipment for it, you can't afford to get it, that's a great alternative to it. There's also the Mold Max 29 NV and 14 NV, which are tin silicones, which are also, again, that low viscosity, so you don't have to worry about vacuum degassing. The only thing with tin silicones are you have to weigh them, where the MoldStar is a 1-to-1 mix ratio by volume. So those are going to be the major two differences. As well as platinums are going to be the ones where you're going to see food safety ratings for. So something like the SmoothSil 940, like this mold here, if you just use it and cast it and then clean it, you can do food in it. Not all silicones are food safe, so that's something to keep in mind. All right. Take this. So now we're going to just backfill this with some of the flexible foam that I was talking about. Also, if you notice, I'm wearing gloves the entire time. Wear gloves, guys, please. You don't want this stuff on your hands. Also, another thing to note about the silicones is silicones do not like sulfur. So that's important for you guys, especially at the school, because latex has sulfur in it. So if you're casting into a mold with latex first, if you try casting silicone into that mold later on, it's not going to want to cure. It's going to stay a goopy mess, and that will lead to problems for you. So whenever you're going to be deciding on what you're going to be casting a prosthetic into, you need to look at yourself and go, all right, do I want to do a silicone piece or do I want to do a foam latex piece? Because you're not going to be able to cast a a silicone piece into a mold if you've already cast latex into it. It's just not going to want to cure. So you have to make that decision right from the get-go. All right, so with the foam, again, just 1-to-1. And then this is the Flex Foam at 6. So again, it's that 6-pound foam that I was talking about earlier. With foams, in the case of ours, specifically with something like this, we always recommend pre-mixing your bee and then whipping more air into it. It's going to create a better rise for it. Mechanically mixing is going to introduce an even better rise for it. So it's always good to just give it a nice whip beforehand just to work air into. So just adding a little pigment as well. So one also thing to keep in mind, your flexible foams are typically, with ours, are going to be a shorter pot life, anywhere ranging from on the low end of 30 seconds to the high end about a minute. I think we might have one that's 90 seconds for the flexible foams. Your rigid foams are going to range more the range of a minute to a minute and a half. So most foams are going to have very short working times. If you're still mixing after that pot life is going off and you start seeing it rise, you're actually causing your foam to collapse, so you're not going to get as much expansion out of it. So you want to mix and pour within that pot life. So when you have 30 seconds, you want to make sure that you get everything done in 30 seconds. So with these, the benefit of that is you don't need to be gentle when mixing, so you don't have to worry about mixing more air into it. You can just whip away and it's fine. Let's give this one more quick stir. And then just so you guys can see the rise, I'm going to leave a little bit in that container there because you're not going to be able to see it as well. Which one's that? 57. Anyone have any questions so far? All right. And then here's a piece as well that I didn't pass around earlier. This is the Epsilon, so that harder coating. So that isn't as soft as the Epsilon Pro. And again, that's just on top of that insulation foam that you guys see there. Also, as you can see, this is overflowing. You don't want to leave foam by itself. It's a bad idea. It will just kind of do its own thing, expand, and then you just have a mess. And I know Jerry would not like a big mess in the foam room. So keep an eye on your foam. Don't let it just go anywhere. Also, be mindful because you don't want to add too much foam into your molds. You can blow them apart. You will damage them, you will break them, so you want to be careful with that. second still. So things with foams are, while they're expanding, they have a very fragile cellular structure. So if you touch them, they're going to collapse. So now you don't have foam anymore. So always want to make sure that you let your foams rest by themselves and try not to disturb them while that's happening. All right. So right now this is partially cured. It's cured enough that the details are all there, but it's not cured enough that it's solid yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and wrap it around this form, and what that'll do is it'll allow it to keep the shape then. And then this cures in half an hour, so by the time we're done here, this should be nice and set up. So again, we'll just set this off to the side, and just some tape will be efficient for keeping that down. All right. All right. We're at that part now. Does everyone have their name on a cup? Yes. Okay. Yes, you have a question.
What was the name of the material you just wrapped around the arm again?
That is Smoothcast 57D. Again, I just pulled it out when it's partially cured. You can do that with any of the resins, but working with something, if you're going to be doing like a bracer like this, the nice benefit is it has some flex to it. So after you wrap it, it'll be able to flex a little bit afterwards. So that way you're not trying to shove something really rigid onto someone's arm. So we're just going to set this off to the side. All right. So has everyone done life casting before? We have not reached that point yet for the first semesters. Ever? No, you guys haven't? Okay. So we're going to be doing a quick little life casting bit here. We're going to be casting a resin versus doing hydrocal or ultracal into it. The reason that we're going to be doing that is to kind of show which resin you guys can use if you wanted to do something like this. The 300 that you guys normally use, it's too slow. Urethane resins are moisture sensitive, so when they come in contact with moisture, they foam or they'll create bubbles. It's a part of the chemical reaction. So if you're using a slower setting resin, what will happen is you'll get pitting on the surface from where those air bubbles are going to be forming, which is going to defeat the purpose of you getting a life cast. You want to be as accurate as possible. So the way that this one was done, the way we're going to be doing your fingers, is we're going to be using our Smoothcast 300Q. It's a resin that has a 30-second pot life and a 5-minute cure time. So you have 30 seconds to mix and pour. So very fast. So because of that, it doesn't have time for the water in the alginate to interact with the resin itself. Also, I will be dispensing some of the Body Double Fast, which is, again, is that skin-safe silicone, so you guys can get a feel for how that actually feels. With the Body Double, it comes in fast, fast, standard, and silk. The silk is different in the fact that it has a built-in release agent to it, so it releases from hair without having to put Vaseline or a release cream into it. Unless you're getting very long hair, in which case I would recommend still applying a release agent along with it. But for shorter facial hair, arm hair, anything like that, the silk you can just apply and not have to worry about releasing. With the body double, though, we always recommend applying a release cream along with it. Just going to set that there as well. So you guys use a different alginate than ours. So ours we just call AlgaSafe. Nothing too fancy. So main difference you're going to notice is your guys is still yellow, right? Yep. So this will be pink instead of yellow. So that's going to... So there's another version of the AlgaSafe as well that's called Acrobat that has a filler in it to help with doing a more vertical surface. This can still do a vertical surface and not just pores. My only recommendation is just adding less water to it. Add more water if you want it to be thinner. Also, water temperature is going to affect curing time. Cure time is going to be 5 to 8 minutes, depending on water temperature. So if it's warmer, it goes off faster. If it's slower, it goes off slower. Everything's, again, based off that chemical reaction. So it's going to be the main difference there. So how many cups do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. That's what I figured. All right. So for the AlgaSafe, it's going to be a 1-to-1 mix ratio by volume. Let's see if we can get away with 1.5, probably going to be the whole bag. All right. Ah, damn it. Too full. All right. All right, so for this, be using a drill mixer just to make it easier. So all this is doing is just speeding up the process. Also, another thing with our alginate is we don't have crystalline silica in it. So crystalline silica is a cancerous, so carcinogen rather is the proper name for it. So we don't have that in ours. All right, so as I'm pouring these, you guys want to come up, grab your cup, dip your thumb in, pull it out for a second, and then dunk it back in.
Remember where you put my cup?
Behind the scenes.
So much shit.
What's that? I think I seen yours earlier. Yours is right here. It's not hit yet. It's right here.
Thank you.
I'll hand you yours once he hits it.
Okay. I know, I read it. That cup doesn't have a name on it.
One sec. Some of these are overfilled.
Let me look.
Yours was on the left. I'm putting it somewhere in the left. Out of this bag.
Oops, thank you.
Trying to help.
Thank you.
Two more over. Right here. Right there.
Can I get a popsicle stick?
Popsicle stick. No-namer.
Oh yeah, we're all
I'm just gonna take the no-namer. I don't give a shit.
Till it's set, so 5 to 8 minutes. It's probably on the 5-minute end.
Right here. Right there.
All right, if it's filled, grab your cup, please. All right, I'm gonna be short. There. There. All right. There you go. Excuse me. How much water? Tight. Not expecting this many. I don't remember offhand. Sorry. This one is one that we sell in particular. Someone wants to grab that one.
I have a cup with my name on it.
probably send it.
There you are. Hell yeah.
I couldn't do it.
I think
That's his name.
Filled up all the way.
I thought it was mine too. I was like, I don't remember writing my full name on the cup.
So because they're heat sensitive, again, everything is heat sensitive. So the more
I have really warm hands. And Stephanie the cold pitch. So it's not setting up as well. That's fine.
No, there's yours is right there. Because I redid it.
All right, this is the body double silicone that I was talking about. So this is in a cartridge with a static mixer. So if you want to hold out your hand,
What do I do with it?
you can just leave it set in your hand and it'll set up and create a texture pad, basically, of your skin.
It's so cool. So we're doing this instead of
Yeah. So this is a 90-second pot life. Yeah, so which is why it's great in a cartridge. I'm gonna hold out your hand.
Do they give me the extractor?
If you're talking about the caulk gun for it, that is separate. All right, is everyone's molds back up? There you go. So everything I've been using thus far has been what we consider our trial kits. This is what our gallon kits look like. 2 1-gallon containers for like 1-to-1 mix ratios by volume. If it's a thicker material, it's gonna be in 1-gallon buckets. 1 second, let me grab a drink of water here. So for this, like I said, this is the Smoothcast 300Q. So it's like the Smoothcast 300 you guys are using, just faster. So again, because of it being faster, you don't have to worry about it interacting with the moisture from the alginate. One other thing to keep in mind, because again, urethanes are moisture sensitive, that means they have a limited shelf life to them. So if you have them sit around too long, you're gonna see that same bubbling effect that they would have with coming in contact with the alginate. So you always wanna make sure that when you're using your material, you open it, you close it, you don't just leave it sitting open, otherwise it's gonna go bad on you. It will still cure. Urethane rubbers, so if you make a mold out of a urethane rubber, typically you're gonna see more urethane rubbers being used for concrete molds and such. Those won't cure properly, so they'll just not set up. But with the urethane resins, the way that you'll notice that it's going bad is what'll happen is you're just gonna have a very bubbly back surface to it, or bubbles are gonna start appearing on the surface of your detail just because of that. So that's where you're gonna know it's gonna gone bad. So unopened, what you're looking at is a year. So if you have material that's just sitting on a shelf unopened, about a year to use. Once you do open it though, then it's gonna start going down from there. There are ways to extend it by using dry gas blankets. Ours is called extended. A lot of the names for our stuff is kind of self-explanatory, so hopefully it makes it a little simple for you guys. So, again, 30 seconds to mix and pour, so I'm going to be quick about this. There we go. Again, temperature sensitive. That was probably a little bit longer than 30 seconds. The material feels a little bit cold because they were sitting in my car on the whole ride up. It was cold this morning. So they're not quite room temperature. As well as coming in contact with the allergen, it's going to slow down it as well. So with silicones, as far as their shelf life, since we're talking about urethane shelf lives, silicones are going to have about 6 months open or unopened. What you'll see with silicones is they're going to start getting thicker as they're older. So the older the silicone is, the thicker it tends to become. Eventually, it will get to a point where it's going to be too old, and it's just not going to cure properly. So that's also something to keep in mind. You don't want to be having something sitting around for years. So you kind of want to order as you need it and not try to stockpile it. More ports, I think. Anyone have questions about projects that are coming up that you may want to be using something that you guys don't have at the school that you have questions about? Just want the things. So, one thing that you guys do have advantage of is we do have a student discount. So, you guys get 10% off of liquid materials. So any of the epoxies, the silicones, the urethane resins, or rubbers, you get a 10% discount on those. Any of the accessories and stuff like that doesn't apply to. So if you guys need to get resin, need to get epoxies, different stuff like that, that you guys do get a discount on. So with that, you just gotta send us a valid student ID. So just gotta send us a copy of that. We can put it into our system and go from there. We do ship out here. Just going to give you guys a heads up. It's about 2 days to ship usually. So just something to keep in mind when you are ordering things. So if you're 4th semesters and you need stuff, kind of keep that in mind. You don't want to wait too long. Otherwise, it may become a problem for you. All right. So, let's see if we can get this to go. So, pretty much, it's chemistry. So, again, if you're not careful, you're trying to pour a piece, this can happen. It will just do it. I've had it happen to me already, so you do need to be mindful of that pot life. You always pay attention to it. Also, again, temperature dependent, so keep in mind, are you working in a colder environment, warmer environment? It's going to affect your stuff. You always want to try to store your materials at room temperature. If you have them below then, they're going to separate faster. So you don't want to be storing them out in your garage, otherwise you're going to be doing a lot of mixing. With the liquid ones, it's not so bad because you can just shake them and they'll usually go back to being the way they were. With the silicones, those are a lot harder to reintegrate everything into. They will separate and they have fillers in them. Those fillers will sink down to that bottom and then you have to rework those in. So you always want to try to make sure you're storing everything at room temperature. Also, don't store it on the floor. If you're storing it on the floor, it's going to absorb the cold from that floor. So try to keep it off the floor, otherwise you'll run into issues with that as well. So even though if your room is room temperature, if you're leaving stuff on the floor is almost always colder, especially if it's going to be in a basement. So now your material's colder than it was. So just little things to kind of keep in mind when working with the materials. All right, so as you can see, that's still on my hand. So, and I can pull on this and it's still not going to want to come off. So I'll remove this with the Dermatac remover now. Well, these are cooling down because again, they are warm right now, so we'll let them cool down for a little bit. So, just a little bit of that. Q-tips, sponge. And just work it. Once I get one part up, I can start working the rest underneath. So I don't even really have to fight it. It just wants to come up on its own, which is nice. So this is going to be nicer to use than Prosate in my opinion, because Prosate is a pain to get off. Yeah. I have, because I've used the Prosate's remover, and it helps, but it's, yeah, spirit gum remover. There. Yeah. It helps it, but there's still a pain. But like I said, like when it comes to this, it removes it. It's, what? I have not tried it on Prosate. I have no idea if this removes Prosate. I know it was designed to remove the Dermatac. I still use Prosate because I have it. It's good for definitely different applications. It's a different type of adhesive. So it's things to take in consideration. What are you doing with it? How is it being used? Because there's different applications for everything. But so slowly just gonna peel this off. So that piece is now off. Take the sponge, soak it just to really work and get any leftover residue off. Paper towel. And there's still a tiny bit left on there, so I'll just take a little bit more and just work it off. And it's off, I'm done. If anyone wants to come and feel the back of my hand to see that it's off, you can, I don't mind. You can feel the back of my hand. I'm not just like going, yeah, it's off. No, nothing. Exactly. So the remover, it's designed to take it off. It does take it off. So it's nice in that extent. So. And then we're always coming out with new stuff. So like I said, with the catalogs that are out there, some of this stuff's just not even in the catalogs. The 57D, the Epsilon Pro, the Dermatac, the cue balls, all that stuff's not in the catalogs because we're constantly coming out with new stuff. So these are good to demold then. So if you would like to come up and grab your finger, again, with the castings, this works because it's the Smoothcast 300Q. You're not going to get the same results with the 300. So just keep that in mind.
Sorry.
This one looks fun.
Oh, JK.
Does anybody have any questions about anything you guys saw today?
Sweat.
I'm like looking everywhere. Where'd she go? No.
Douglas Education Center, anything but ordinary. For more information, go to dec.edu.